In the summer of 1986, London moved through its ordinary rhythms with the particular confidence of a city that had weathered harder decades and come out the other side. The economy was opening. Young professionals filled the terraces of West London, signed leases, showed flats, and arranged viewings with the brisk courtesy of people who believed that paperwork and appointments could organize even the messiest parts of life. Fulham, in that summer, was not the polished address it would later become. It was still a place of modest streets and practical housing, where estate agents worked from small offices and where a viewing at a property on Shorold Road would have seemed, to anyone passing, entirely unremarkable. That ordinariness is the first thing to hold in mind. Suzy Lamplugh was 25 years old. She worked as an estate agent for a firm in West London. She was described by those who knew her as capable, sociable, and conscientious about her work. She had plans. She had colleagues who expected her at the office. She had parents, Paul and Diana Lamplugh, who would later devote years of their lives to searching for her and to changing how missing person cases were handled across Britain. But on the morning of Monday, July 28, 1986, none of that future grief was visible. There was only a working day, a diary entry, and an appointment that should have taken an hour or two and ended with Suzy returning to her routine. The appointment was at number 37 Shorold Road, Fulham. Suzy had arranged to meet a client who had introduced himself as Mr. Kipper. That name, which would later echo through decades of investigation and public speculation, was at the time nothing more than a line in an office ledger. A man calling about a property. A viewing scheduled. The kind of interaction that happens thousands of times in a city like London without incident. What is confirmed is this. Suzy went to the appointment. She was seen in connection with it. She did not return to her workplace in the way that was expected. Her white Ford Fiesta was later found abandoned, not at the property itself but in another location, with indications that she had left it there and not come back for it. Personal items associated with her were missing. Search efforts, both immediate and sustained, did not locate her. No remains have ever been found. The Metropolitan Police treated the case as a missing person investigation that quickly became a suspected homicide, and it has remained open across the years that followed. What is not confirmed is almost everything else that people most want to know. Who was Mr. Kipper? Was that even his name, or merely a disguise chosen for a single afternoon? Did Suzy meet him at the property, or encounter him elsewhere in the sequence of that day? What happened in the interval between her last confirmed movements and the discovery of her car? The investigation has pursued these questions through witness appeals, media coverage, reviews of other crimes, and the painstaking work of detectives who inherited a file started in the summer of Margaret Thatcher's Britain and never closed. The atmosphere of London in 1986 matters to the case, not because it explains what happened, but because it describes the world Suzy inhabited. Mobile phones were not carried by estate agents walking to viewings. Appointments were made by telephone and confirmed on paper. A woman going alone to show a flat was normal professional practice. Security protocols that later became standard in the property industry did not yet exist in the form we would recognize today. Suzy's disappearance would, in time, help change that. The Suzy Lamplugh Trust, founded by her parents, would campaign for personal safety awareness and for better procedures around lone workers. That legacy is real and documented. It does not, however, answer the question of where Suzy went. The car is one of the case's few solid anchors. Found abandoned, it suggested that Suzy had driven somewhere, stopped, and not resumed her journey in that vehicle. The absence of her from the scene of its discovery implied movement on foot, movement with another person, or movement compelled by someone else. Each possibility branches into further unknowns. If she entered another vehicle willingly, why? If she did not enter willingly, where were the witnesses? Fulham in daylight, even on a summer afternoon, was not empty. Yet no one came forward with an account clear enough to resolve the case in those first weeks, and the clarity never arrived in the years after. Inside the official record, the case remains a missing person investigation with the strong inference of unlawful killing. No one has been convicted of Suzy Lamplugh's murder or manslaughter. No body has been recovered to allow a coroner to establish a cause and manner of death. This distinction is important, because the public conversation around the case has often moved faster than the courtroom. Names have been suggested. Other crimes have been examined for connection. Detectives have looked at men already imprisoned for violent offenses against women and asked whether the patterns align. But alignment in investigation is not the same as proof at trial. One name that has recurred in media and public discussion is John Cannon, a man later convicted of the murder of another woman and suspected by some commentators of involvement in other cases. Police have investigated Cannon in connection with Suzy's disappearance. He has denied involvement. He has never been charged in relation to Suzy Lamplugh. That gap between suspicion aired in newspapers and conviction entered on a court register is precisely the gap this case has occupied for decades. It is a space filled with theory, with circumstantial argument, with the human need to attach a face to an absence. The official position remains unchanged. The case is unsolved. To sit with the confirmed timeline is to feel how quickly a day can narrow. Morning. An office. A diary. A property on Shorold Road. A name, Mr. Kipper, that may have been false from the first syllable. Then a car found without its driver. Then days of searching. Then weeks. Then years. The search extended across land and water. Appeals were made. Photographs of Suzy, smiling and professional, were printed beside headlines that gradually shifted from urgency to endurance. Her parents walked the streets that detectives had already walked. They knocked on doors that had already been knocked. They carried the particular exhaustion of people who are asked to hope without evidence and to grieve without a grave. Over the years, the investigation has been reviewed, reopened in spirit if not always in headline, and examined against new forensic methods. Techniques that did not exist in 1986 have been applied to whatever material the case still holds. Fresh appeals have been made to anyone who might have heard a conversation, seen a meeting, noticed a detail that seemed insignificant at the time. This is the rhythm of a long cold case. Not dramatic breakthroughs, but patient return. Not closure, but refusal to file the matter away as though absence were the same as explanation. What theories exist tend to cluster around the identity of Mr. Kipper and the question of whether Suzy's disappearance was planned or opportunistic. A false name suggests planning. A property viewing suggests a lure constructed around the routines of her job. If that is what occurred, then someone studied the mechanics of estate agency work well enough to exploit them. If it was not what occurred, then the name may have been incidental, and the truth may lie in a direction the investigation has examined less publicly. We do not know which of these landscapes is real. The official record does not endorse one theory over another. It holds the facts that have been verified and leaves the rest open. Suzy's parents, Paul and Diana, became figures of quiet public significance. They did not choose that role. They accepted it because the alternative was to let their daughter's disappearance disappear itself, folded into statistics and forgotten by everyone except those who loved her. Their work on safety awareness has helped countless people think differently about appointments, about lone travel, about the small decisions that seem trivial until they are not. That is a legacy measured in prevention, not resolution. It does not bring Suzy back. It does not locate her. It simply ensures that her name remains attached to the idea that an ordinary workday can fracture without warning. For investigators, the case presents the challenge common to bodiless disappearances. Without remains, there is no crime scene in the forensic sense. Without physical evidence, prosecution becomes a matter of testimony, confession, or pattern strong enough that a jury can bridge the gap. None of those bridges has been built successfully in court for Suzy Lamplugh. The file remains active. Suzy is frozen at 25 in the public mind while the world she left has changed entirely. The case remains, unchanged in its essentials. A woman went to work. A client called himself Mr. Kipper. She did not come home. It is worth returning to Shoreold Road, not because the street holds an answer, but because it holds the last ordinary point in the chain. A house number. A door. A property prepared for viewing. Perhaps curtains drawn back. Perhaps a key turned. Perhaps a few minutes of professional conversation about rooms and rent and the practical details that occupy such meetings. Whatever happened next did not leave a clear public trace. The street today is the same street in name, but not in meaning. For those who know the case, it is a coordinate in a mystery. For those who do not, it is simply another road in Fulham. The absence of a body has shaped the grief of Suzy's family in ways that are difficult to describe without reducing them. There is no funeral that settles the matter. There is no grave to visit. There is instead a permanent conditional tense. She is missing. She is presumed dead by many, but not confirmed dead in the way that a burial confirms. The law can infer. The heart can accept. But acceptance without evidence is a slow, uneven process, and it does not arrive equally for everyone who knew her. In the language of cold cases, hers is classified as unsolved. That word sounds final, but in policing it often means ongoing. Unsolved does not mean abandoned. It means that the questions put to the record in July of 1986 have not yet received answers that satisfy the standards of proof the legal system requires. It means that Mr. Kipper, whoever he was, has not been identified in a way that has led to conviction. It means that the white Ford Fiesta was found, but the person who drove it there and left it was not seen clearly enough by the world to make the seeing matter in court. If you are listening to this in the quiet of night, you may find that the case settles differently than a solved murder would. There is no terminal chapter. No verdict read aloud. No sentence that allows the mind to close a door and sleep on the other side of certainty. There is only the slow understanding that some stories stop mid-sentence. Suzy walked into a summer afternoon as an estate agent doing her job. The sentence never finished. The official record tells us what is known. A disappearance. An abandoned car. A false name. Decades of investigation without recovery of remains and without conviction. The unofficial record, larger and louder, tells us what people believe, who they suspect, and how the mind arranges fragments into narrative. Between those two records lies the space where Suzy Lamplugh still resides. Not in a grave. Not in a courtroom. In the gap between an appointment kept and a life resumed. London continued. The truth of what happened on July 28, 1986, remains unspoken in any venue that counts as proof. The case is open. The name Mr. Kipper is unanswered. The viewing at 37 Shoreold Road is both a mundane detail and the last confirmed frame of an ordinary life. Suzy Lamplugh is still missing. The investigation has not yielded a body. No one has been convicted. Mr. Kipper has not been officially identified. These are the facts that remain when the theories are set aside and the night grows quiet. And in that quiet, one question lingers without demanding an answer, only holding it open as the city holds its breath between midnight and dawn. If a single ordinary appointment on an ordinary street can vanish without trace, what does that tell us about the fragility of the routines we trust to carry us safely home? York in the spring is a city that seems designed for continuity. The walls still stand. The minster still rises above the streets. Students move through the university quarter with the unhurried rhythm of people who believe there will always be another term, another seminar, another morning shift in a kitchen that smells of bread and coffee and the ordinary work of feeding others. In March of 2009, that continuity felt especially visible. Winter was lifting. Days were lengthening. The university calendar turned toward the end of another academic year. Life in a cathedral city of modest size moved with the gentle predictability that makes people feel safe without ever quite naming the feeling. Claudia Lawrence was 35 years old. She worked as a chef at the University of York. Those who knew her in a professional context described someone reliable, skilled, and committed to her work. She had a flat in the Haworth area of the city. She had routines. She had colleagues who expected her at the stove the following morning. She had a father, Peter Lawrence, who would later become a patient and persistent public voice in the search for answers, walking the same streets year after year, giving interviews with the quiet determination of a man who refuses to let his daughter become only a headline. What is confirmed begins with the ordinary arc of a working evening. On Wednesday, March 18, 2009, Claudia finished a shift. She was last seen in the vicinity of her home on Haworth Road, in the area where she lived and where neighbors knew her face. She was expected at work the next morning. She did not arrive. That absence, simple and devastating in its simplicity, opened an investigation that has continued across more than a decade and a half without delivering the resolution her family and the city have sought. Her flat, when examined, presented a particular kind of puzzle. It did not show obvious signs of a struggle. It was not ransacked in the manner of a burglary gone wrong. It appeared, in the broad terms released to the public, largely undisturbed. For investigators, such a scene can suggest many things. That Claudia left willingly and did not return. That someone familiar to her entered without forcing the space into disorder. That whatever happened to her happened elsewhere. That the absence of visible disruption is itself a clue, or that it is merely the ordinary condition of a home whose owner stepped out and never came back. The official record does not resolve which of these readings is correct. Her mobile phone activity after she was last seen became a point of investigative attention. In missing person cases, digital traces often form the modern equivalent of footprints. A call. A text. A brief signal. Each can suggest presence, or the illusion of presence, or the use of a device by someone other than the owner. Police have acknowledged phone contact occurring after Claudia was last seen in person, but the full interpretation of that activity has not been made public in a way that closes the case. What remains officially is the fact of it, a thread in a larger tangle. The search for Claudia extended across York and beyond. Officers spoke to neighbors, colleagues, acquaintances, and the loose network of people who orbit any life lived in a university town. York is not a vast metropolis. Connections run close. A chef at the university might know dozens of people directly and hundreds indirectly through pubs, suppliers, friends of friends, the small social machinery of a place where paths cross repeatedly. Investigators mapped that machinery as best they could. Appeals were made. CCTV was examined. The city, which had seemed so settled on the morning her absence was discovered, became a grid of questions. No body has been found. This fact shapes everything that follows. Without remains, there is no confirmed murder scene in the forensic sense. Without a confirmed scene, prosecution must rely on other kinds of evidence, testimony, digital records, financial traces, confessions, or circumstantial patterns strong enough to persuade a jury. Over the years, various individuals have been arrested in connection with the investigation. Some were questioned extensively. Public interest surged with each development. Yet no murder charge has been sustained to conviction in Claudia's case. The official classification remains that of a missing person, strongly suspected to be a victim of homicide, with the case still open and still actively reviewed. It is important to separate what the law has done from what the public has concluded. Arrest is not proof. Release is not exoneration in every sense, but it is not conviction either. The gap between those states is where this case has lived for years. Media coverage has named persons of interest. Commentators have constructed theories around local connections, around relationships, around the particular social geography of Haworth and the university quarter. Some of these theories are argued with confidence. None of them have produced the kind of courtroom certainty that ends a case in the record books. In the years after 2009, the investigation did not go dormant in the way the public sometimes imagines cold cases do. There were renewed searches. There were excavations at locations identified through intelligence work and through the slow accumulation of tips. In 2019 and in the years that followed, attention turned to waste and landfill sites in the region, places where, in theory, a body might have been concealed years earlier and remained undiscovered through the ordinary processes of waste management and time. Such searches are logistically enormous. They require permission, planning, machinery, and the sober acceptance that many will yield nothing. They also carry hope, which is both necessary and exhausting for families who have already waited years. Peter Lawrence, her father, became a figure familiar to anyone following the case in Britain. He walked, spoke, and asked the public to remember details that might seem small. Claudia at 35, smiling, professional, frozen in the year of her disappearance while the university continued to feed students and the Minster continued to cast its shadow over streets she once walked. Colleagues noticed her absence the following morning. Managers tried to reach her. The ordinary chain of workplace expectation snapped at its first link, and everything after that belonged to the police. What theories exist in public discussion tend to focus on people near Claudia's life. This is common in disappearances without stranger abduction evidence. The investigation has examined relationships, workplace contacts, and the possibility that someone with local knowledge could move through the city with minimal visibility. Others have wondered whether the phone activity after her last sighting suggests deception, or whether it suggests something more mundane that only the full investigative file could clarify. These are speculations. They are not findings. The official position remains that the case is unsolved and that no one has been convicted of harming Claudia Lawrence. For cold case investigators, the passage of time cuts both ways. Memories fade. Witnesses die or relocate. Physical scenes are altered or demolished. But forensic science advances. Digital archives grow more searchable. A detail that meant little in 2009 may mean more when viewed beside information gathered a decade later. The case has been revisited in this spirit, not as a closed chapter but as a continuing inquiry. That distinction matters. Unsolved does not always mean forgotten, and in Claudia's case, the official record suggests active attention rather than dusty abandonment. The absence of a body also means the family has lived without the grim finality that a funeral sometimes brings. Claudia's father and those who loved her have spoken about the suspended quality of their loss. She is missing. She is feared dead. But without remains, the conditional mood persists. Haworth Road is a last known coordinate. The university kitchen is the site of a shift that ended and a morning that never began. In the language of the official investigation, Claudia Lawrence is a missing person. The strong police inference is that she was killed. No suspect has been convicted of that killing. Various lines of inquiry have been pursued, including searches at waste sites and repeated appeals for information. The flat on Haworth Road remains part of the case's geography. The phone activity after her last confirmed sighting remains part of its timeline. Everything else that circulates in podcasts, articles, and online forums belongs to the larger, unofficial record, where certainty is offered freely because proof is not required. It is worth pausing on the ordinariness of the last day, because that ordinariness is the case's central fact. A chef finishing work. A walk toward home in a city she knew. An evening that should have been followed by sleep, alarm, shower, coffee, the short journey back to the kitchen. Nothing in that sequence announces tragedy. Nothing in it suggests that the name Claudia Lawrence would eventually be spoken in the same breath as Britain's most persistent missing person investigations. It was a Wednesday in March. The year was 2009. The war in distant countries and the financial troubles of the era belonged to headlines. Her day belonged to work. And then it did not. The break is so clean in the record that it almost feels artificial. Last seen. Not seen again. Phone activity noted. Flat examined. Search begun. The machinery of investigation engaged. The city informed. The family notified. The long period of waiting commenced. Between those two states, last seen and search begun, something happened that only one or more people in the world know fully, and they have not told the story in a courtroom. For listeners trying to rest, the case may settle as a study in interruption. Not a dramatic explosion of violence heard by neighbors, but a silence that grew loud over hours and then days and then years. The official record offers structure rather than narrative. Timeline. Location. Classification. Open status. Claudia did not vanish in a remote wilderness. She vanished in a city of walls and neighbors and cameras, in an age of mobile phones, in a life embedded in a workplace and a community. Spring in York that year continued regardless. Daffodils along the walls. Tourists returning to the shambles and the museums. The case inserted itself into the city's memory without stopping its commerce or its seasons, a reminder that local tragedy can feel personal in a place small enough for paths to cross repeatedly, and large enough to absorb loss into its ongoing life. The official findings, stated plainly, are these. Claudia Lawrence disappeared on or after March 18, 2009, in York. She was last seen near her home. She did not attend work the following morning. Her flat showed no obvious signs of disturbance. Phone activity after her last sighting has been noted in the investigation. Extensive searches, including excavations at waste sites in later years, have not located her. Arrests have been made during the investigation, but no murder conviction has been secured in her case. The investigation remains open. Theories abound. Local connections. Hidden relationships. Concealment in places only a searcher with specific knowledge might think to look. Some theories are argued with detail. None have replaced the official status of the case as unsolved. That boundary, between what is believed and what is proved, is where Claudia Lawrence remains. And as the night settles around this story, the city of York sleeps beneath the same walls it has worn for centuries. Students close laptops. Kitchens grow dark. Haworth Road lies quiet. Somewhere in the file, a photograph of a chef at 35 waits for information that has not yet arrived. If a life can end its visible chapter on an ordinary walk home in March, without leaving a body and without leaving justice, what does that silence ask of the rest of us who pass unremarked through our own evenings, believing the morning will simply come? Glasgow in the late 1960s had a particular energy, part industrial certainty and part Saturday night release. The city worked hard through the week and then poured itself into dance halls, pubs, and the bright rooms where bands played and couples moved under lights that made ordinary clothes look briefly glamorous. Tenements climbed in dark rows toward the sky. Buses carried people home across districts that everyone knew by name. The River Clyde moved through the city's history like a slow sentence that never quite ended. In that setting, young women went out as young women have always gone out, dressed for the evening, expecting laughter, music, and the company of friends. They did not expect to become entries in a file that would still be open more than half a century later. The name Bible John was not given by police at first. It came from a witness, a woman who survived the night that another woman did not. It came from conversation overheard at a party, from remarks about scripture and sin, from the kind of detail that seems insignificant until it is the only detail the world has left. The nickname spread because newspapers needed a shape for fear, and because the public needed a way to speak about an unknown man without admitting how little was truly known about him. Bible John. Two ordinary words joined into something that sounded almost biblical itself, as though the city had named its own shadow. What is officially confirmed is a series of 3 murders occurring between 1968 and 1969. 3 women, strangled, after evenings out in Glasgow. A witness description of a man who spoke about religion in a way that left an impression. A composite sketch circulated during a major manhunt. An investigation that drew enormous public attention and police resources. And, across the decades that followed, no conviction for these killings. The case remains unsolved in the courtroom sense. That is the foundation. Everything else must be built carefully on top of it, with the distinction between evidence and speculation kept in view. The first victim in the series commonly associated with Bible John was Patricia Docker. She was 25 years old. In February of 1968, she was found dead, strangled, having been out on a night that should have ended in the ordinary way such nights end, with fatigue, keys, sleep, and a slow return to weekday life. Instead, the city received the first of 3 shocks that would come to be read as a pattern. A woman killed after a social evening. A method of violence that spoke of proximity, control, and intent. Jemima MacDonald was 32 years old. In August of 1968, she too was found strangled after going out. The interval between the deaths tightened the public sense that something deliberate was moving through Glasgow's nightlife. Fear does not always arrive immediately. Sometimes it accumulates. A first death can be read as an isolated tragedy. A second death, similar in manner, forces a different reading. Police and public alike began to look for connections, for a single offender, for a description that might travel faster than the man himself. Helen Puddock was 29 years old. In October of 1969, she was murdered after an evening that included a taxi journey shared with her sister and a man her sister later described in detail. This witness account is the architectural center of the Bible John case. It is the reason the unknown offender has a nickname. It is the reason a composite sketch exists. It is also the reason the case remains both vividly imagined and fundamentally incomplete, because witness memory, however sincere, is not the same as identification proved in court. According to the witness account that police treated seriously in the investigation, the man discussed religion. He quoted from the Bible. He spoke disapprovingly of adultery and sin. He was described as tall, well-dressed, with reddish hair. He danced. He conversed. He left an impression of sociability mixed with something sterner beneath the surface. Helen's sister got out of the taxi at her own home. Helen continued on with the man. She was found strangled the following day. The man was not seen again in a way that led to his arrest. The composite sketch produced from witness description became one of the most recognizable images in Scottish criminal history. Tall. Red-haired. Smart clothing. A face composed from memory rather than photograph. For years it hung in public spaces, above articles that urged anyone with information to come forward. Thousands of people must have looked at it. Some must have thought they recognized someone. A few may have been correct. But recognition in the mind and proof in the courtroom remain separated by the distance that unsolved cases preserve. The dance halls and party rooms of 1960s Glasgow form the backdrop against which these deaths occurred. The Barrowland Ballroom, later central to public memory of the case, sits in the story as part of the city's social geography. Music. Crowds. The temporary equality of a night out, where occupations and worries are set aside and people meet as bodies in motion rather than as names on a ledger. It was in such settings that the victims lived their last ordinary hours. Laughing. Listening. Planning the short journey home. Strangulation as a method of killing is intimate. It requires closeness. It suggests the killer was near enough to control, to overcome, to complete the act without immediate interruption. Each of the 3 women was found dead by strangulation after such evenings. That repetition is the pattern investigators officially recognized. It does not tell us motive. It does not tell us identity. It tells us only that the same hand, or the same type of intent, may have been at work. The manhunt that followed Helen Puddock's murder was substantial by the standards of the time. Glasgow was a city unaccustomed to serial killings in the modern sense of the phrase, though the phrase itself was still finding its public footing in the late 1960s. Police interviewed thousands. Leads were pursued. The sketch was published. Fear spread through the nightlife that had once felt like release from the week's labor. Women were warned. Men were scrutinized. The city tried to shrink the unknown into a description, and the description, for all its detail, did not yield an arrest. It is here that the long later history of the case introduces names and theories that must be handled with care. In subsequent decades, other murders in other places led to the conviction of offenders whose biographies invited retrospective comparison. Peter Tobin, convicted of murders committed years after the Bible John period, has been discussed publicly in connection with these Glasgow killings. Some investigators and journalists have argued that his age, appearance, movements, or known violence make him a plausible candidate for further review. DNA science, limited by the age and preservation of evidence from the 1960s, has been examined in the hope that biological traces might bridge the decades. What must be stated clearly, because the official record requires it, is that Peter Tobin has not been convicted of the Bible John murders. Public speculation and police review are not the same as a verdict. The link between Tobin and Bible John is debated. It is not established as fact in court. To say otherwise would be to collapse the distance between theory and proof, and that distance is precisely what defines this case as cold rather than closed. Other named suspects and discarded leads have appeared across the years as well, each receiving attention, each failing to produce the conviction that would end the file. The 1960s in Glasgow were not an abstraction. They were a particular fabric of work, church, family, football, music, and the tight knots of communities where everyone seemed to know everyone and yet a man could vanish into the crowd of a Saturday night. Religious language was not exotic in that setting. Scripture was part of common speech for many people. A man quoting the Bible at a party might have seemed unusual in tone without seeming impossible in fact. That is why the witness detail carried weight. It was specific enough to nickname, yet not specific enough to name. For the families of Patricia Docker, Jemima MacDonald, and Helen Puddock, the case has been a lifetime of absence layered on absence. Not only the absence of the killer in handcuffs, but the absence of the full story told in a courtroom. Children grew up without mothers. Siblings aged with unanswered questions. The city moved on in its visible forms. New decades arrived. The Barrowland continued to host music. Glasgow changed its face in ways both subtle and vast. The file remained open. Cold case review in modern policing often returns to such files with tools unavailable in the original investigation. Genetic analysis. Digital archiving. Fresh appeals to witnesses who may now feel safe speaking. In the Bible John case, these methods have generated hope and frustration in equal measure. Evidence from the 1960s is not generous to the 21st century laboratory. Witnesses die. Memories blur. Physical samples degrade. The sketch remains young while the people who saw the man age beyond the version they once described. What theories exist tend to cluster around identity. Bible John as a local man who moved easily through Glasgow's nightlife. Bible John as someone passing through the city with just enough familiarity to navigate it. Bible John as a construction of witness memory that accurately captured some traits and misremembered others. Bible John as a single offender, or, in more skeptical readings, a grouping of similar crimes attributed to one name because the mind prefers one story to several. The official investigation has treated the series as linked. That is the working foundation. It is not a confession from the killer. The religious language reported by the witness has produced its own branch of interpretation. Some have wondered whether the man was genuinely devout in a punitive sense, whether he used scripture as performance, or whether the comments were casual drunken talk later remembered as sinister because of what followed. None of these interpretations are confirmed. They are attempts to explain the nickname, to give motive where motive is not established. The killer's inner life remains unknown. Only the outer fact of 3 women strangled after nights out is solid. Public fear in the wake of Helen Pudik's murder altered behavior, as fear does. Women traveled in company. Taxi habits changed. Parents waited longer at doors. Police presence increased around nightlife. And then, after October of 1969, the series, if it was a series, stopped in public view. No further killings were officially added to the Bible John file in the same immediate pattern. Whether that means the killer died, was imprisoned for something else, moved away, or simply stopped is itself a theory without proof. The case thus occupies a strange position in British criminal history. It is famous. It has a nickname. It has a face drawn from memory. It has been examined and re-examined. And yet it ends, officially, where it began, in not knowing. 3 women are dead. Their names are not forgotten. Patricia Docker. Jemima MacDonald. Helen Pudik. Each had a life before the last evening, and that life is often reduced in retelling to the manner of death. They were more than victims. They were workers, friends, daughters, people with plans. The case should hold their names as carefully as it holds the nickname of the man who was never identified in court. For those listening in the quiet, the Bible John story may feel less like a chase narrative and more like a fog settling over a city. Lights in the dance hall. Music fading. A taxi moving through streets that look different now. A sister stepping down at her door, believing ordinary separation is only temporary. A man quoted scripture. A woman did not come home. Morning brought discovery instead of routine. The official record states the facts without the comfort of closure. 3 murders in Glasgow between 1968 and 1969. Strangulation. Witness description producing the name Bible John and a composite sketch. Major investigation. No conviction. The case remains open. Public discussion has included Peter Tobin and others as possible subjects of review or speculation, but no court has convicted anyone as Bible John for these deaths. The unofficial record is larger. Books. Documentaries. Forum threads. Confident identification of suspects based on pattern and coincidence. Some of this work is serious. Some is less so. All of it circulates more freely than police files, because speculation does not require the chain of custody that evidence demands. Listeners may encounter theories stated as though they were settled. They are not settled in the official sense. They are possibilities, some more plausible than others, none carrying the weight of verdict. 3 women went out on ordinary evenings in a city that thought it knew its dangers and its safety. They did not return. The Bible John murders remain, in the official record, unsolved. And in the gentle quiet at the end of this telling, a question remains, not demanding pursuit, only reflection. If a city can name its fear and still not find the person beneath the name, what does that leave us holding in the dark, beyond the sketch, beyond the scripture, beyond the music fading into morning? Bath in summer carries a particular kind of beauty that can make tragedy feel somehow out of place, as though sorrow should choose a less graceful city. The stone glows warm in the evening light. The terraces hold their Georgian composure. The Avon moves under bridges where tourists pause with cameras and locals pass with the unhurried familiarity of people who have seen the same view 1,000 times. In June of 1996, that beauty was simply the background to an ordinary Saturday night. Young people went out. Pubs and clubs filled with music and conversation. The city, small enough to feel knowable and large enough to hold anonymity in its side streets, did what it had always done. It offered an evening out and the reasonable expectation of a morning after. Melanie Hall was 25 years old. She worked as a clerical officer at the Royal United Hospital in Bath. She had a boyfriend. She had friends. She had the social circle that forms around hospital work and city life, where shifts create camaraderie and weekends create the desire to step away from fluorescent corridors into somewhere louder and less measured. On the night of Sunday, June 9, 1996, though the date sits on the border between Saturday's social time and the early hours of Sunday, Melanie went out with her boyfriend and friends to the Cadogan Club on Upper Bristol Road. What is confirmed about that evening is its initial ordinariness. A group night out. Drinks. Music. The slow accumulation of hours that make people separate from the crowd without thinking much of it, stepping outside for air, visiting another venue, assuming the others will be where they were before, assuming the night will reassemble itself as nights usually do. Melanie became separated from her group. That separation is one of the case's pivotal facts, though its meaning is not explained by the fact alone. People separate on nights out and reunite. Melanie did not reunite. She did not come home. She did not appear at work in the way expected. She vanished from the visible sequence of her life. CCTV in Bath City Centre captured her later in the night. The cameras placed her in the urban fabric, moving through streets that are still there now, past shop fronts and corners that have changed ownership but not geography. The footage gave investigators a last confirmed image. It tightened the timeline. It told them she had been present in the city after leaving the social orbit of the Cadogan Club. It did not tell them where she went next, or with whom, or under what circumstances. The camera sees only what it is angled to see. The rest of the night belonged to shadows and to whoever shared them with her. Search efforts began. Police appealed to the public. Friends and family carried the disorienting early days of a disappearance, when hope and fear alternate hour by hour. Weeks became months. Months became years. Melanie's absence stretched across a decade and more without yielding her location. Missing person cases without bodies force families into a suspended grief. You cannot bury what you have not found. You cannot receive a death certificate grounded in physical proof. You live with the photograph on the poster and the cruel optimism that the next call might be the one that answers. For 13 years, Melanie Hall remained missing in the official sense. Then, in October of 2009, a discovery altered the classification of the case without resolving it. Human remains were found near the M4 motorway at Thornover Farm, in the area of Bradford-on-Avon, not far from Bath in the geography of the region but far in every other sense from the night she disappeared. The remains were identified as Melanie Hall. A long missing person case became a confirmed homicide. The question shifted from where is she to who did this, and the second question remains unanswered in court. The location of the remains is itself a source of public speculation. A motorway corridor. Open land. A place where someone with local knowledge or passing familiarity might deposit what they did not want found. The 13-year gap between disappearance and discovery suggests concealment rather than immediate accidental loss. Officially, the case is treated as murder. The precise details of cause of death have not been fully publicized in all accounts, but the investigative posture after identification was clear. Melanie did not die of natural causes in that field. Someone placed her there, or caused her to be there, after violence. It is important to hold two timelines in mind at once. 1996, when a young woman separated from friends on a summer night in Bath and was last seen on city center cameras. 2009, when remains were found beside a motorway and a family received the grim confirmation that their long search had ended in identification rather than reunion. Between those years lies the cold case in its truest form. Detectives who began the work retired. Forensic methods changed. Appeals were renewed. Someone knew what happened in Bath that night, and that knowledge did not surface in a way that produced conviction. The Cadogan Club, the hospital, the city center streets, and the field near the M4 now form a chain of places that mean more than their addresses. For investigators, they are nodes in a map. For the public, they are symbols. For Melanie's loved ones, they are the geography of loss. The club where the evening began with social warmth. The streets where cameras confirmed her presence. The long silent years. The field where she was finally found. Each location asks a different question. None has given up a complete answer. After the remains were identified, a major reinvestigation began. Modern forensic techniques were applied to whatever evidence could be recovered from the scene and from material held since the 1990s. DNA work, central to so many cold cases reopened in the 21st century, featured in appeals. Police asked the public to think back to that summer night, to men they knew, to vehicles they remembered, to arguments or confessions or drunken boasts that seemed meaningless at the time. This is the rhythm of reinvestigation. Not a single revelation, but a widening request for memory. No successful prosecution has followed. That is the official state of the case as it remains open. Various theories circulate in public discussion. Some focus on acquaintances from the night out. Some suggest an opportunistic encounter after Melanie separated from her group. Some wonder whether the killer knew the motorway area well enough to choose it as a deposition site. These theories are not convictions. They are the mind attempting to bridge the gap between a CCTV still and a field 13 years later. Melanie worked as a clerical officer at the Royal United Hospital. Colleagues would have expected her at her desk. One employee never returned. The boyfriend and friends who were with Melanie at the Cadogan Club have been part of the investigative landscape without being publicly convicted of involvement. This distinction matters. People present on a night out are witnesses until evidence makes them suspects, and suspects until a court makes them guilty. Public rumor often skips those steps. The official record has not announced a conviction. Appeals have been broad, suggesting police believe the answer may still live in the community's memory rather than solely in forensic comparison. Summer nights in Bath have a way of feeling enclosed, as though the hills around the city cup sound and hold it close. Footsteps on stone. Laughter leaving a club. The diminishing frequency of buses as the hour grows late. Melanie walked through that acoustic world and did not walk back into her own morning. The silence she left was not immediate. It grew. It became institutional. It became a cold case file with a missing person phase and a homicide phase, joined by the discovery at Thornover Farm. For forensic investigators, 13 years between death and recovery is a barrier and sometimes a strange assistance. Barriers because evidence degrades, scenes are disturbed, memories fade. Assistance because people who were young in 1996 are older now, sometimes more willing to speak, sometimes burdened by what they have carried. Cold case detectives understand that time alters both the evidence and the witnesses, never in predictable proportion. The M4 motorway, busy with traffic moving east and west, is an unlikely monument to a personal tragedy. Drivers pass Thornover Farm without knowing. The field exists in public record now as a place where Melanie was found, but physically it is simply land beside a road, subject to weather and agriculture and the indifferent passage of years. That indifference is one of the hardest truths for families. The place where your loved one is discovered does not mourn them. It continues. Melanie's family lived the two-part grief common to long missing cases. First the absence. Then the identification. The second does not replace the first. It adds to it. Knowing she is dead removes a category of hope. It does not identify who made her dead. It does not explain the night between the Cadogan Club and the city center cameras and the field. It settles one question and leaves the larger one standing. Public appeals in the years after 2009 have emphasized DNA and the possibility that forensic comparison might yet link an individual to the crime. Such appeals are both sincere and strategic. They tell the public the case is active. They tell a potential offender that science may be closer than it was in 1996. Whether that proximity will ever become conviction remains, officially, unknown. What theories exist should be named as theories. Melanie may have encountered someone she knew after separating from her group. She may have met a stranger. She may have entered a vehicle willingly or under coercion. The killer may have acted impulsively or with planning sufficient to conceal her for 13 years. None of these possibilities has been established in court as the account of her death. They are the narrative options the mind uses to fill the space between confirmed points. The confirmed points are enough to carry the weight of the case. A woman of 25 vanished on a summer night in Bath after a club outing. She was last seen on CCTV in the city center. She was missing for 13 years. Her remains were found near the M4 at Thornover Farm in October of 2009. Her death is investigated as murder. No one has been convicted. The case remains open. Hospital colleagues, friends, and family remember Melanie as a person rather than as a headline. That is easy to say and important to mean. Cold cases strip individuality in public retelling until only the last night remains. She was 25. She worked at the Royal United Hospital. She had a boyfriend and friends and a life that extended beyond Upper Bristol Road. The case should hold that fullness even as it examines the emptiness left behind. Bath continued. Summers came. The Cadogan Club remained part of the city's nightlife, a place where other young people would later step out into the same streets Melanie walked. The Royal United Hospital treated patients who never knew the clerical officer who did not return. Traffic moved along the M4 past the field where she was found. The city absorbed the story into its local memory and kept living. In the language of policing, Melanie Hall's case is a solved identification attached to an unsolved homicide. We know what happened to her in the broadest sense. She was killed. We know where she was found. We do not know, in the courtroom sense, who killed her or precisely how the hours of June 9 unfolded after the cameras lost her. For listeners resting in the dark, the case may feel like a long exhale rather than a sudden scream. A night out. A separation from friends. A camera frame. Then years of silence. Then a field beside a road. Then reinvestigation, appeals, DNA, and still no verdict. Officially, murder confirmed, killer unknown, case open. Unofficially, names are whispered and scenarios constructed where proof is not required. If a night can begin with music and friends in one of England's most beautiful cities and end in a field by a motorway, unseen for 13 years, what does that journey ask us to notice about the distance between the world we think we see and the one that holds what we have lost? Wales in winter is not a single landscape but a series of moods. Valleys hold mist close to the ground. Roads wind between towns whose names appear on maps and in songs with equal familiarity. The Severn estuary, wide and tidal, separates Wales from England not as a wall but as a shifting line of water and sky. In the mid-1990s, British music culture was undergoing one of its periodic transformations, and among the bands moving through that moment with intensity and intelligence were the Manic Street Preachers. They had built a reputation for lyrics that refused easy comfort, for politics worn on the sleeve, for a seriousness that stood slightly apart from the ironic distance of the era. Richey Edwards, 27 years old, was their lyricist and guitarist. He was also a young man carrying a documented history of depression and self-harm, a fact the public record acknowledges and that any honest telling must include without sensationalizing it, without reducing his life to diagnosis alone, and without pretending that mental suffering explains disappearance in any simple way. On Wednesday, February 1, 1995, Richey Edwards was expected to join his bandmates for travel to the United States. The Manic Street Preachers were due to fly to America for a promotional tour. Airports operate on the assumption that people with tickets arrive. Bands operate on the assumption that members gather, check bags, pass through the ordinary bureaucracy of international travel, and board. Richey did not arrive at the airport in the expected way. His absence that morning was the first visible break in a day that would become one of the most discussed disappearances in British music history. What is confirmed begins with his car. A silver Vauxhall Cavalier was found at the Severn View service area near the Severn Bridge, a location that carries obvious symbolic weight in public imagination because of the bridge's scale and the water beneath it. The vehicle contained personal effects. His passport. His wallet. Medication. Items that suggested he had driven to that place and left the car there. Not everything about his movements that morning is publicly resolved in a single narrative, but the car at the service area remains one of the case's fixed coordinates, photographed, documented, examined. Inside the band, the expectation of travel made his absence immediate and alarming. Outside the band, the machinery of search began. Police treated Richey as a missing person. Appeals were made. The music press, which had followed the Manic Street Preachers closely, reported the disappearance with a mixture of concern and disbelief. Fans posted flyers. The case acquired the visibility that comes when a public figure vanishes, though visibility is not the same as clarity. Cameras can magnify an absence without filling it. Richey's history of depression and self-harm is part of the official context surrounding the case. He had been open, in interviews and in the public record, about mental health struggles. He had received treatment. He had been hospitalized at points in his life. This history has led many commentators, and some of those who knew him, to wonder whether he took his own life, particularly given the location near the Severn Bridge. That wondering is understandable. It is also not the same as confirmation. The official record classifies him as a missing person. No body has been recovered. No scene has produced the kind of physical proof that would allow a coroner to end the matter with the authority of identification and cause of death. It is essential to speak about mental health here with care. Depression is not a prophecy. Self-harm in a person's past does not dictate their future actions in any deterministic way. Richey Edwards was an artist, a friend, a son, a bandmate, a thinker whose writing engaged with politics and culture at a level beyond his years. To treat his disappearance as inevitable because of his documented suffering would be to do violence to the complexity of his life. To ignore that documented suffering would be to omit something investigators and those close to him necessarily considered. The balanced telling holds both truths. He struggled. He also had plans, relationships, work, and a morning when he was expected in America. The Severn Bridge, opened in the 1960s and later joined by the second Severn crossing, spans an estuary that looks calm from certain angles and treacherous from others. Tides move. Weather changes. Water that appears passive can conceal much beneath its surface. Public speculation about Richey's disappearance has often returned to the bridge and the water below, not because proof places him there, but because the service area location invites the thought. Officially, that thought remains speculation. Possible. Discussed. Not confirmed by recovery of remains. In the weeks and months after February 1st, sightings were reported and investigated. This is common in high-profile missing cases. The mind sees a familiar face in a crowd. Hope converts uncertainty into belief. Police must follow each lead while knowing that most will not resolve the case. No confirmed sighting has been established in the public record as definitive proof that Richey Edwards lived beyond that morning. The last fixed point remains the car, the effects inside it, and the absence at the airport. For the band, the disappearance created a wound that did not close simply because performances continued or because years passed. Bands are built on the fiction of permanence, that the lineup on the album will be the lineup on the stage. The Manic Street Preachers continued without Richey in the physical sense, carrying his absence into their music and public statements with a restraint that acknowledged both love and not knowing. Fans held vigils in the language of pop culture, posters, anniversaries, songs played in his memory. The case became part of the band's story without becoming fully explained by it. The legal status of Richey's absence changed in 2008, when he was declared presumed dead for purposes of estate administration. This is a procedural step families sometimes take when years have passed without contact or evidence of life. It allows financial and legal matters to be settled. It is not the same as finding a body. It is not the same as closing a criminal investigation with a perpetrator named. It is the law's way of acknowledging that a person who has been gone for more than a decade may not return. For his family, it was a painful necessity rather than a comfort. What theories exist are often stated with more confidence than the evidence supports. Suicide is the most discussed theory, given the bridge location, the medication in the car, and his mental health history. Voluntary disappearance is another, the idea that he chose to step away from public life entirely. Accident is less prominent but not impossible in every theoretical sense. Foul play has been considered less centrally in public discussion, though missing person investigations generally retain openness until evidence narrows the field. None of these theories has been confirmed by the discovery of Richey Edwards' remains. That single fact keeps the case in a category that frustrates the desire for closure. Blackwood, in Gwent, where the band formed and where Richey's roots lay, is part of the emotional geography of the story. The South Wales valleys produced a particular working-class culture, passionate about sport and music and politics, skeptical of pretension, loyal to local identity. The Manic Street Preachers emerged from that soil with lyrics that connected private pain to public structures, individual despair to political critique. Richey's writing was central to that voice. His disappearance did not erase the words he left behind. It complicated them. Listeners returned to his lyrics after he vanished, searching for foreshadowing as people do, finding ambiguity where art had always refused single meaning. February in 1995 was cold and ordinary in the way February always is. The band had obligations. Airports were busy. The Severn View service area, like all service areas, existed for coffee, fuel, and a brief pause between destinations. Someone parking there and not continuing the journey is not unusual in itself. Only context makes it monumental. Only the hours that followed made that parked car a shrine of uncertainty. Investigators examined the vehicle and its contents. They spoke to those who knew Richey. They mapped his movements as far as evidence allowed. They considered his mental state without treating it as a complete explanation. They faced the limitation common to cases without bodies. If someone entered the estuary, recovery is not guaranteed. If someone walked away under a new name, detection is difficult. If someone met harm at the hands of another, the scene may be far from the last known location. The official record does not announce which of these paths was taken. For his family, the years since 1995 have been lived in a particular kind of public privacy. Missing person families often find their grief displayed in headlines while the core of it remains inaccessible to outsiders. Anniversaries bring articles. Documentaries revisit the case. Each new piece of coverage asks the same questions and arrives at the same official boundary. He is missing. He is presumed dead in the legal sense. He has not been found. The medication found in the car has been discussed extensively in public forums. Medication is evidence of treatment, not proof of outcome. People carry prescribed drugs because they are managing conditions, because they intend to continue management, because a doctor has written a script and a pharmacy has filled it. Its presence in the vehicle tells us Richey was engaged with treatment at some level. It does not tell us what he did with that engagement on February 1st. That limit on inference should be respected, especially when mental health is involved and when stigma already encourages lazy conclusions. The passport and wallet suggest he did not board the plane under his own documented identity that day. They do not rule out every alternative, but they align with the airport absence. The band flew without him. America received the Manic Street Preachers without one of their central members. The tour continued or adjusted under the weight of the unknown. Music journalists wrote pieces that tried to balance speculation with respect. Fans lit candles. Wales held its breath in the way a small country holds its breath when one of its notable sons is spoken of in the past tense and the present tense at once. Time has passed. The second Severn crossing now carries traffic alongside the older bridge. Service areas have been renovated. The band has released more albums. Richey remains 27 in the photograph most often used in appeals, young and intense, frozen while the world aged around the image. That frozen quality is one of the cruelties disappearance inflicts on public memory. Cold case language does not always fit disappearances that may not be homicides. Richey Edwards' case is open as a missing person investigation. Police have not announced a criminal resolution. The presumed dead declaration serves civil purposes. The central human fact remains absence without location. A family without a grave. A band without a bandmate. A public without an ending. If you are listening to this in the quiet of night, you may find the case resonates differently from a murder mystery. There is no confirmed villain. There is no recovered body telling its story to forensics. There is a young man whose writing mattered to many people, whose mental health struggles were real and documented, whose car was found near a great bridge on a morning when he was expected elsewhere, and whose path from that point forward is not established in the record. The respectful telling does not dramatize his suffering. It does not claim to know his final intent. It does not use his art as a confession. It states what is known. It acknowledges what is likely without confusing likelihood with proof. It leaves room for the dignity of a life that was more than its last day. The official findings, stated plainly, are these. Richey Edwards disappeared on or after February 1, 1995. His car was found at the Severn View service area near the Severn Bridge with personal effects inside, including passport, wallet, and medication. He did not join his band for scheduled travel to the United States. No confirmed sightings have been publicly established as proof of his continued life. In 2008, he was declared presumed dead for estate purposes. His body has not been found. The case remains open as a missing person investigation. No criminal conviction explains his disappearance. Theories include suicide, voluntary disappearance, and other possibilities discussed less prominently. None are confirmed by physical recovery. His history of depression and self-harm informs context but does not close the case in the forensic sense. Wales continued. The band continued. The estuary continued its tides beneath the bridges. Fans grew older. New listeners discovered the music and learned, separately, that one of its architects never reached the age many of his contemporaries reached. The case sits at the intersection of culture and private tragedy, public enough to be discussed endlessly, personal enough to resist easy narration. Richey Edwards wrote lines that refused consolation. It would be a betrayal of that spirit to pretend his disappearance offers consolation now. It offers only the same uncertainty it offered in February of 1995, softened by time but not dissolved by it. And in the stillness at the end of this account, a question remains, gentle rather than urgent, appropriate to a case defined by absence rather than by proof. If a person can leave behind their car, their passport, their medication, and their name, and still not be found, what does that teach us about the limits of what we can know about another person's inner life, even when they have shared some of it with us in art?